You are watching the extended cut. Enjoy! When you begin truly healing, you discover that you don't always turn out the way you once imagined you would. Sometimes it's even better. Just like when I was planning my independent woman sketch, I originally thought I would have her posed a different way and wearing pants with a flowing overskirt. Instead, I trusted my intuition and things did not go as I originally planned. They turned out even better. You can see how I changed my original sketch in this time-lapse video. In reality, it took me about 45 minutes to create the sketch alone, separate from the mental planning before the pencil even touched the paper. Here I'm using trace paper, a charcoal pencil, and the graphite-less tip of a mechanical pencil to transfer and mirror my original sketch onto the full artwork. I'm using a very thin-tipped paintbrush and water to make the charcoal bleed like watercolor paint. I remember when I used to think I could never paint with watercolors. There was one class I took with my mom when I was around 12 years old at the local Michael's store. I felt very stressed and pressured to speed my work along to keep up with the instructor, so I wouldn't miss out. And just to be clear, the Michael's instructor was not the one causing the stress, nor was it the Michael's store or staff. I didn't know that later the instructor would come around to each student to give personalized instruction. By that time, I was already done that artwork, but I was not happy with it. A Bob Ross-style mountain, landscape, and waterfall in the daytime with a blue sky and a royal purple smacked on the horizon because I put too much purple into that spot. It was very frustrating trying to control the watercolor using the wet-on-wet technique. It felt like juggling the paint, struggling to keep up. It was awful. I felt like a failure with this work. It was messy and ugly. I felt so discouraged, like I could never do watercolor again, that I was never good enough for it. But when you're doing the healing work in yourself about your past, you learn to identify the truth, to give yourself sympathy where no one gave it to you when you needed it. And you heal by giving yourself the real love that those who cared for you never truly gave. My mom said she liked the purple in the sky, though it didn't look real, in that silly painting of mine. I agreed it didn't look real. It still bothered me. I was very frustrated as with pencils and markers on dry paper, I had way more control and precision. Being the 12-year-old perfectionist and people pleaser that I was with deep insecurities, I really did believe I could never paint with watercolor after that failure of a painting. I remember my mom's full reaction left me feeling very confused. It felt like gaslighting, and I felt very dismissed, and her words made me feel even worse than how I felt before. I'm just speaking from my experience. I felt extremely alone with my own family. I learned years later that you should never feel afraid of your protectors. I wish I knew this while I grew up. There were several people in my life who I should have been able to trust, but they gave me more than enough reason to not trust them. Their toxic behavior was sickening, even physically. I never felt safe in my home. When I look back, I realize that much of my life really was a nightmare that I was surviving. Here I won't go into too much detail. There was a lot of things that happened, and things where my safety was very much at risk. And it was definitely a spiritual battle, for sure. And part of how I survived miraculously was by, Jesus intervened. That's the best way to explain it, because it's true. There were many spiritual experiences that I believe God gave me, which helped save me, which helped heal me, or give me at least that little bit of healing I needed so I would have the strength to escape that very unsafe situation. However, the road to my freedom was quite bumpy, and there was other unsafe situations that followed. There was a lot of things that happened, though I was vulnerable and questioning myself still trying to heal. God still protected me. Along the road to freedom, there was a lot of things that happened that I did not expect they'd happen the way they did. But there was a reason for everything. God had a plan, though I didn't understand it fully. I had an idea, but God directed my steps in ways that I thought would be detours and seemed like setbacks, where I thought it was in reverse. When it seemed like everything was going wrong, in hindsight, I learned that even the things that I thought were horrible mistakes ended up being for a reason. Like how it seemed like I went from one toxic living situation to another and another. Since being free now, I know why those reasons are. I realize the immense importance of how essential it is for a survivor who's suffered a lot of different harm to have a safe place to heal and recover mentally, physically, emotionally. And I didn't have that. And I think that that's a very important distinction that must be made. I've heard some people with who I suspect had some underlying cruel motives. They said some very horrible, hurtful things that a lot of other survivors have had to deal with, where they think that it's the survivor's fault for going from one toxic situation to another, when it's not true. There's a lot of people who take advantage and prey on survivors because they're vulnerable, because they need the healing, and they're still questioning themselves, just like I was. And that's why it's so important to have a safe, loving, caring home to heal and recover properly. It is so essential. It's huge. There were people that I stayed with temporarily that I thought would be safe, but they deceived me. They were very hurtful. They were very sneaky. They outwardly made it seem like they were safe. They would go through the motions of doing actions to try to make it seem to me like I was welcome, and then sneak in verbal attacks and emotionally harming words that eventually escalated into what I would interpret as abuse. That re-traumatized me, that put me back in survival mode all over again when my body was decompressing from years of high intensity survival mode, as I like to call it, because it was such high stress I was suffering, and that takes such a toll on the body. That's why a survivor needs a safe place for healing. It is so crucial. It is so essential, so that way the cycle of abuse doesn't continue. And not just a safe place, but safe people as well. People who are empathetic and caring and evidently not toxic. Thankfully, eventually God did lead me to find a safe place to call home and to heal and grow, so that I could understand my purpose and to help other survivors as well. When I found a home that was safe, finally, even that was different than what I expected. It was even better. God thought about the details long before I did, and God's plan was much better than my initial idea. Back when I was surviving that nightmare, somehow little sparks of hope sprouted. It was difficult for these sprouts to survive, and the elements did much harm to my hopes. Yet, my hope endured like the strength of a weed, trampled on, buried alive, discarded, revived and nearly destroyed repeatedly over and over again. Somehow, hope survived. Jesus was the nurturer of my hopes. Creating my artwork was one of these sprouts of hope. In one of my previous videos, I touch on having spiritual experiences that were part of my survivor story. One piece of this is how I remember very clearly when Jesus encouraged me to try watercolor painting. He validated that my desires to paint with watercolor are in my heart for a reason. He validated that my desires were not childish impulses or something evil that had to be kept under control, that I was not inferior. Jesus defied all the horrible lies. The truth won. I escaped, and I'm free. There are so many more spiritual experiences that led to my freedom I will share later in my future videos. While in that repeatedly sabotaged healing process, every small step I made of defiance, even subtle baby steps, was a step toward freedom. One of these baby steps was daring to try watercolor painting again. Jesus lovingly encouraged me more than once to try it. Not with fake manipulative love, I mean real love, with substance, with a natural uplifting and healing effect that stayed, that resonated, that was like food for my starved soul. So when I tried watercolor painting, not the wet-on-wet technique, the wet-on-dry paper technique, the results were so different. It reminded me of ink. When I discovered I could use my pastel chalk like watercolor paint, oh, this was like discovering treasure, as I already loved using pastel chalk for creating dry, powdery artwork like the lovely lioness and windows. Every small brushstroke was empowering as I learned to direct the bleed of the watercolor/wet pastel chalk paint, like how I would wipe my tears on my face. It was profoundly empowering for me as I knew well of how deeply I believed I could not paint like this, that I was somehow unable to go with the flow of the watercolor. I was shocked, happily, by how natural painting like this became. Like, why didn't I start this before? All the other times I tried, I believed I had failed. But this was different. It was a small step to helping me unbury the lies that suffocated me. My artwork shown here, Independent Woman, was created in early 2025. When I was finally free, in late 2024, I emerged from a kind of healing hibernation. Stepping into the new year, I set out to build something better and invest in my art career. This 11-inch by 15-inch charcoal and pastel chalk painting in my wet-on-dry watercolor style became more than just art. It became a symbol of survival, transformed into beauty, and healing made visible. She is made with empowerment, the story of overcoming and healing despite the suffocating. This is more than a work of art. It is a part of my life story. I'm so glad that I chose to trust my intuition with this piece. It turned out far better than my original idea. Earlier this year, in 2025, I originally thought I was just going to share my survivor story with my artwork to inspire other abuse survivors. But God, the original artist and author of life and creation itself, had something even better in mind. There is so much more depth to my story than just surviving all the danger and making art from the pain. There's miracles beyond this dimension, beyond what the known five senses perceive, beyond common understanding of space and time. I'll be sharing more of that in future videos. For now, I hope this time-lapse inspires you to take your own first steps of healing and to trust that things can turn out better than you expect. If this touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and know that more of my story and artwork is still to come. For original artwork acquisitions and info on limited edition prints, please email me at hello@artbybaw.com. To view my wearable art, please click the link in the description.